1857 to 1859. The name John Brown is no longer spoken. It is thundered. From Boston drawing rooms to Missouri slave pens, from London newspapers to Kansas campfires, one face now haunts the American night. A tall, raw-boned man with a white beard that flows like a prophet's robe and eyes that burn straight through a man's soul. They call him Old Brown, Captain Brown, Pottawatomie Brown, the terror of Kansas. Children in the North draw his picture on school slates. Children in the South are told he eats slave owners for breakfast. He has become the living embodiment of everything America fears about itself. In secret parlors of Boston and New York, 6 wealthy abolitionists, the Secret Six, meet by candlelight. Gerrit Smith, the millionaire philanthropist. Samuel Gridley Howe, the doctor who taught the blind to speak. Theodore Parker, the preacher who scares even Unitarians. They pass the hat and fill it with thousands of dollars. They buy him 200 Sharps rifles. They buy him 950 steel pikes forged in Connecticut for the slaves who will rise when the signal comes. They do it trembling. They do it praying. They do it knowing they are arming an Old Testament storm. John Brown walks into their parlors wearing the same plain black coat he wore when he slaughtered men at Pottawatomie Creek. He stands before silk curtains and crystal chandeliers and speaks in a voice that makes the wallpaper curl. I have surveyed the mountains. I have counted the cost. I will strike one blow in Virginia that will shake slavery to its foundation. Give me the means, and I will free every slave in the South or die in the attempt. Gerrit Smith weeps openly. Theodore Parker writes him a blank check and says, "Spend it all, and God be with you." Frederick Douglass visits him in a hidden chamber in Chambersburg, Pennsylvania. The two giants face each other. One escaped slave, one white man who has killed for freedom. Douglass begs him to abandon the plan. You will be surrounded in a trap and die like a rat. Brown's answer is quiet fire. I will carry the war into Africa. If I die, my grave will burst open and 1,000,000 armed men will march out of it. Douglass leaves shaking his head. He will later say it was the only time he ever feared a white man was right. Everywhere Brown goes now, crowds follow. Women faint at the sight of him. Men press forward to touch his coat. Children run alongside his wagon shouting, "Old Pottawatomie!" He never smiles for them. He only looks at them with those terrible eyes and says, "Prepare for war. The hour is closer than you think." In Springfield, Massachusetts, he stands before a black church congregation and raises his right hand, still scarred from Pottawatomie. I pledge before God and these witnesses to devote the remainder of my life to the destruction of American slavery with all the means that God has given me. The entire church rises as one and sings, "Blow ye trumpet, blow," until the walls shake. He has 21 men now, white and black, farmers, scholars, fugitives, dreamers, all ready to die because one old man with a thunder beard looked at them and said, "Follow me."
He sharpens the pikes himself at night, humming hymns. He writes letters to his family he never mails. He kisses his youngest children goodbye while they sleep, whispering, "Tell your mother I loved her more than life, but I love justice more." Northern newspapers call him a hero. Southern newspapers offer $25,000 for his head, dead or alive. He laughs when he reads it. They will have to raise the price. In a hidden farmhouse in Maryland, he gathers his tiny army for the last time. He stands in the candlelight, beard glowing like white fire, and reads from the book of Revelation. And the seventh angel sounded, and there were great voices in heaven saying, "The kingdoms of this world are become the kingdoms of our Lord." Then he closes the Bible, looks at each man in turn, and says, "Tomorrow we cross the river. Some of us will not come back, but slavery will never be the same again." 21 men answer with one voice, "Amen." Outside, the wind howls through the Blue Ridge Mountains like the trumpet of judgment. Inside, the man with the beard of thunder stands motionless, eyes closed, listening. He is 59 years old. He has buried wives and children. He has killed with his own hands. He has been hunted like an animal. And now the entire nation waits breathless to see what he will do next. They do not understand yet. John Brown is no longer a man. He is a storm wearing human skin. He is the thunder that has been gathering over America for 250 years. And tomorrow night, October 16th, 1859, he will finally break.
Summer 1856. Kansas is no longer a territory. It is a slaughterhouse with a map. Homes burn every night. Corpses float down the Kansas River face down like logs. Children learn to sleep with rifles instead of dolls. And in the middle of the smoke and screaming rides one man with a Bible in one hand and a Sharps rifle in the other, John Brown, now called Old Pottawatomie Brown after the battle where he and 30 men held off 400 Missourians until the Prairie itself seemed to bleed. His beard is longer, whiter, wilder. His eyes no longer human. They are Old Testament windows straight into the wrath of God. He no longer walks. He strides like an avenging prophet who has already seen the end of the world and approved of it. Wherever he appears, the air changes. Free state settlers fall to their knees. Pro-slavery men run or die. He forms a guerrilla company called the Liberty Guards. Their flag is simple, a black field with a white star and the words, "Death to slavery" or "Death to traitors." They ride at night. They strike without warning. They leave no prisoners. One dawn in August, Brown's men ambush a company of border ruffians on the Marais des Cygnes. They kill 23. They carve the letter F for freedom into the chests of the dead, so even the buzzards know why. Southern newspapers scream, "Brown is a demon in human form." Northern newspapers print his portrait on the front page and call him Captain Brown, Defender of Liberty. Both are terrified. Both are right. At night, he gathers his men around campfires and reads from a Bible whose leather cover is stained dark from blood that will never wash out. He reads the story of Phineas,
who drove a spear through an Israelite and Midianite woman in a single thrust to stop God's plague. Then he closes the book and says, "We are Phineas. Slavery is the plague. The spear is in our hands." His men nod. Some weep. All reload. He writes letters to his wife Marianne that he never mails. "The sword of the Lord is unsheathed. I feel no fear, only joy. Kansas is Golgotha, and I am both the thief and the cross." He keeps a notebook titled Sinner's List. Every pro-slavery name he hears goes in it. Every name eventually gets crossed out in red. When a preacher visits the camp and begs him to show Christian mercy, Brown invites the man to dinner. They eat beans and cornbread. Then he opens the bloody Bible to Psalm 137. "Happy shall he be that taketh and dasheth thy little ones against the stones." He closes the book and says, "That is mercy," ending the line before it can breed more evil. The preacher leaves before dessert. By autumn, Kansas has 2 governments, 2 capitals, 2 armies, and 1 prophet riding between them with fire in his beard. Free state towns hang lanterns in their windows when they hear his horse approaching, like signaling the arrival of an archangel. Pro-slavery towns nail their doors shut and pray he passes by. He never passes by. One night, he burns an entire settlement called Franklin to the ground after finding a slave pen hidden under the church. He stands in the flames, reading Revelation aloud while the steeple falls. His own sons begin to break. John Jr. goes mad, wandering the prairie talking to ghosts. Jason weeps uncontrollably for weeks. Brown writes in his journal, "My boys are soft. God will harden them or take them. Either way, the work continues." When winter finally comes, the snow cannot cover the blood. It only makes it brighter. Brown stands on a hill above the smoking ruins of Pottawatomie, beard white with frost, Bible open in one hand, sword in the other, and speaks to the wind. "Kansas bleeds so that America may one day be cleansed. Let the storm rage." Then he mounts his horse and rides south, leaving behind a territory that will never be the same. Behind him, settlers whisper a new prayer, "Lord, save us from the wrath of the righteous." Ahead of him waits Virginia, an arsenal, and a rope. But for now, Kansas is his altar, and the bloody Bible is open on it. Every page soaked red, every verse a battle cry, every drop of blood a promise. Slavery will drown in the flood it has created, or John Brown will drown trying. And the prairie keeps bleeding, year after year, until the whole nation finally joins it.
Pottawatomie Creek, Kansas, May 24, 1856, 1:47 a.m. The moon is a white-hot coin nailed to a black sky. Inside the Doyle cabin, a candle gutters. James Doyle, his 2 grown sons William and Drury, and 2 neighbors sleep on corn-shuck mattresses. They are pro-slavery settlers who rode with the border ruffians that sacked Lawrence. They have bragged about what they would do to the next abolitionist they caught. Tonight, the abolitionist comes to them. 7 silent figures surround the cabin, faces blackened with soot. broadswords gleaming like ice. John Brown stands at the door. He does not knock. He lifts the latch and walks in as calmly as a man entering church. James Doyle wakes to the cold kiss of a blade against his throat. "Get up," Brown says, voice low, voice of an Old Testament angel who has already read the verdict. Doyle's wife, Mahala, grabs her husband's arm, screaming. Her youngest son, 16-year-old John Doyle, lunges for a rifle. One of Brown's men clubs him to the floor with the flat of a sword. Brown never raises his voice. Take them outside. Leave the women and children. They dragged the free men into the yard, barefoot, shirtless, begging. Mahala Doyle runs after them, clutching her nightgown, hair wild. "Please, they have families! Mercy!" John Brown turns to her. Moonlight catches his eyes, two burning coals in a dead face. "Woman, the people of Lawrence begged for mercy. You gave them none. God has heard their cry." He nods once. The swords rise and fall. The first blow splits James Doyle's skull to the teeth. Blood sprays across the grass like dark rain. William tries to run. A blade catches him between the shoulder blades. He crawls 10 feet, leaving a red furrow before another strike ends him. Drury drops to his knees, hands raised, praying. "Lord Jesus!" The sword takes his arms off at the elbows first, then his head. It is over in 90 seconds. No guns, no noise, except the wet sound of steel on bone and the soft gurgle of men trying to breathe through opened throats. Mahala Doyle stands frozen in the doorway, mouth open in a scream that never comes. John Brown steps over the bodies, sword dripping, and looks straight at her. "Tell Kansas what happens when men make war on the innocent." Then he walks back into the night as calmly as he arrived. The second cabin is quieter. Alan Wilkinson is dragged out still half asleep. He recognizes Brown from a Lawrence rally. "Brown, for God's sake!" The sword answers before he finishes the sentence. The third cabin is the worst. Two brothers, William and Henry Sherman, are hacked to pieces on their own porch. One of them lives long enough to crawl inside and die at his wife's feet. When it is finished, 7 men stand in a circle around 5 ruined bodies, hands severed, skulls split, limbs scattered like broken dolls. John Brown raises his blood-wet sword to the moon and speaks the only prayer he will ever offer for this night. "Lord, I have done thy bidding. Let the storm come." Then he kneels in the grass, dips his fingers in the blood, and marks a cross on his forehead like war paint. His men watch in silence. Some will never speak again. Some will wake screaming for the rest of their lives. But John Brown is at peace. He washes his hands and sword in the creek until the water runs clear. He mounts his horse and rides away without looking back. Behind him, the prairie drinks the blood and says nothing. By dawn, the news spreads like wildfire. 5 pro-slavery men butchered in their beds, hands cut off, heads nearly severed. No mercy, no survivors. The territory explodes. Free state men call it justice. Pro-slavery men call it the work of the devil. Both are right, because on the night of May 24th, 1856, the devil did come calling on Pottawatomie Creek. He wore the face of a white-bearded abolitionist who believed God had handed him the knife. And when he left, Kansas learned a new kind of fear.
the kind that has no scream loud enough, the kind that comes with a Bible verse and a broadsword, the kind that would not stop until it reached an engine house in Virginia and set a nation on fire. That night, the devil did come calling, and his name was John Brown.
May 23rd, 1856. Pottawatomie Creek, Kansas Territory. Moonlight so bright it feels like judgment. John Brown stands in the doorway of his son's cabin, face carved from granite, Old Testament eyes burning holes through the night. Inside, 5 of his sons and 2 neighbors sit around a pine table. They have just read the latest newspaper. Lawrence, the Free State capital, sacked by pro-slavery border ruffians. Houses burned, printing press thrown in the river. Free State men beaten, shot, bayoneted in the streets. One of Brown's sons, Frederick, is already half mad from a beating he took in Lawrence. He rocks in the corner, muttering to shadows. John Brown closes the door. The room goes still. He speaks so softly they have to lean in to hear. The cries of the oppressed have reached the ears of the Lord of hosts, and the Lord has chosen instruments. He opens the Bible to the book of Judges and reads about Ehud and Eglon, about a left-handed man who drove a dagger into a tyrant's belly so deep that the fat closed over it. Then he closes the Bible and lays 5 broadswords on the table, heavy, sharp, forged for cutting cane in Louisiana. Now they have a different harvest. God has given us the sword of Gideon, he says. Will you wield it? His son John Jr. begs him to wait. Father, we are not soldiers. We will be hanged. Brown's answer is quiet thunder. Better to hang for justice than live as cowards. One by one, 7 men stand up. They sharpen the blades on a whetstone until the sound is the only thing in the world. At midnight, they ride out, faces blackened with soot. No badges, no names. They are no longer fathers, brothers, neighbors. They are the sword of the Lord and of Gideon. First cabin. James Doyle, pro-slavery settler, dragged from his bed in his nightshirt. His wife screams. His teenage sons beg. Brown's men hold the family back. John Brown himself raises the sword and brings it down across Doyle's skull. The sound is wet and final. Then the sons. One tries to run. A blade catches him between the shoulder blades. He crawls 10 feet, leaving a red trail in the grass before he dies. Second cabin. Alan Wilkinson, dragged out barefoot. He pleads that he has a sick wife. The sword answers. Third cabin. William Doyle and his brother. They are hacked to pieces on their own doorstep while the moon watches without blinking. 5 men dead in less than an hour. Hands cut off, skulls split, bodies left for the wolves. No shots fired. Only the whisper of steel through flesh and the occasional gurgle of a man trying to speak with half a throat. When it is finished, John Brown washes his hands in Pottawatomie Creek. The water turns pink, then clear again. He looks up at the moon and speaks aloud to no one.
I have done thy work, Lord. Let the judgment begin. The next morning, pro-slavery settlers find the bodies. They vomit, they scream, they swear vengeance. Kansas explodes. Within days, both sides are killing without mercy. The territory bleeds so hard, it earns the name Bleeding Kansas. John Brown disappears into the tall grass. Newspapers call him a monster. Free state settlers whisper his name like a prayer. His own men never speak of that night again. Some go mad. Some never sleep without seeing moonlight on blood. But John Brown sleeps like a child, because for the first time in his life, the chains spoke back, and the prairie drank the answer. Pottawatomie was not murder, it was baptism. Baptism in blood for a war that had not yet been declared. 5 men died so that 4 million might live. John Brown never repented. He never apologized. He only said, years later in a Virginia jail cell, "I acted under direct command from God. If I had to do it again, I would do it exactly the same." The sword of Gideon had tasted flesh. It would not be sheathed again until Harper's Ferry. And somewhere in the tall Kansas grass, the wind still carries the sound of steel on whetstone and the soft, wet finality of a world that would never be innocent again.
May 23rd, 1856. Pottawatomie Creek, Kansas Territory. Moonlight so bright it feels like judgment. John Brown stands in the doorway of his son's cabin, face carved from granite, Old Testament eyes burning holes through the night. Inside, 5 of his sons and 2 neighbors sit around a pine table. They have just read the latest newspaper. Lawrence, the Free State capital, sacked by pro-slavery border ruffians. Houses burned, printing press thrown in the river. Free State men beaten, shot, bayoneted in the streets. One of Brown's sons, Frederick, is already half mad from a beating he took in Lawrence. He rocks in the corner, muttering to shadows. John Brown closes the door. The room goes still. He speaks so softly they have to lean in to hear. The cries of the oppressed have reached the ears of the Lord of hosts, and the Lord has chosen instruments. He opens the Bible to the book of Judges and reads about Ehud and Eglon, about a left-handed man who drove a dagger into a tyrant's belly so deep that the fat closed over it. Then he closes the Bible and lays 5 broadswords on the table, heavy, sharp, forged for cutting cane in Louisiana. Now they have a different harvest. God has given us the sword of Gideon, he says. Will you wield it? His son John Jr. begs him to wait. Father, we are not soldiers. We will be hanged. Brown's answer is quiet thunder. Better to hang for justice than live as cowards. One by one, 7 men stand up. They sharpen the blades on a whetstone until the sound is the only thing in the world. At midnight, they ride out, faces blackened with soot, no badges, no names. They are no longer fathers, brothers, neighbors. They are the sword of the Lord and of Gideon. First cabin. James Doyle, pro-slavery settler, dragged from his bed in his nightshirt. His wife screams. His teenage sons beg. Brown's men hold the family back. John Brown himself raises the sword and brings it down across Doyle's skull. The sound is wet and final. Then the sons. One tries to run. A blade catches him between the shoulder blades. He crawls 10 feet, leaving a red trail in the grass before he dies. Second cabin. Alan Wilkinson, dragged out barefoot. He pleads that he has a sick wife. The sword answers. Third cabin. William Doyle and his brother. They are hacked to pieces on their own doorstep while the moon watches without blinking. 5 men dead in less than an hour. Hands cut off, skulls split, bodies left for the wolves, no shots fired. Only the whisper of steel through flesh and the occasional gurgle of a man trying to speak with half a throat. When it is finished, John Brown washes his hands in Pottawatomie Creek. The water turns pink, then clear again. He looks up at the moon and speaks aloud to no one. I have done thy work, Lord. Let the judgment begin. The next morning, pro-slavery settlers find the bodies. They vomit. They scream. They swear vengeance. Kansas explodes. Within days, both sides are killing without mercy. The territory bleeds so hard, it earns the name Bleeding Kansas. John Brown disappears into the tall grass. Newspapers call him a monster. Free state settlers whisper his name like a prayer. His own men never speak of that night again. Some go mad. Some never sleep without seeing moonlight on blood. But John Brown sleeps like a child, because for the first time in his life, the chains spoke back, and the prairie drank the answer. Pottawatomie was not murder, it was baptism. Baptism in blood for a war that had not yet been declared. 5 men died so that 4 million might live. John Brown never repented. He never apologized. He only said, years later in a Virginia jail cell, I acted under direct command from God. If I had to do it again, I would do it exactly the same. The sword of Gideon had tasted flesh. It would not be sheathed again until Harper's Ferry. And somewhere in the tall Kansas grass, the wind still carries the sound of steel on whetstone and the soft, wet finality of a world that would never be innocent again.
6. The Black Rage of 1837. Alton, Illinois, November 7th, 1837. The night America murdered a printing press. Elijah Parrish Lovejoy, Presbyterian minister, abolitionist editor, 34 years old, stands inside his warehouse, surrounded by 3 brand-new presses still in their crates. He has already lost 2 presses to pro-slavery mobs. He has already been shot at twice. Tonight, he has sworn the 3rd press will print or he will die beside it. Across the street, John Brown, 37 years old, unknown tanner from Ohio,
stands in the rain watching the warehouse windows glow like a church on fire. He has come to Alton to buy land. He will leave with a different purchase. Inside, 20 defenders load rifles with shaking hands. Outside, 200 men drink whiskey and carry torches and shout the same thing mobs always shout when they are about to kill truth. Kill the nigger-loving preacher. Lovejoy steps onto a crate and speaks through the open door, voice calm, almost gentle. Gentlemen, we have broken no law. We only ask to print what we believe. If you want our press, you will have it over our dead bodies. The mob answers with a volley of rocks that shatter every window. The first wave charges. Defenders fire. Men fall screaming on both sides. John Brown stands across the street, rain soaking his beard, fists clenched so tight the knuckles crack. He does not move to help. He is only one man. But something inside him is moving so fast it feels like dying. Second wave. A ladder slams against the wall. A man climbs with a torch. Lovejoy raises a shotgun and fires. The man falls, burning. Then the mob brings a battering ram made from a tree trunk. The door splinters. Lovejoy runs downstairs to reload. A bullet meant for the press finds his heart instead. He staggers, blood pouring from his mouth, collapses beside the very machine he swore to defend. The mob roars inside. They smash the press with sledgehammers. They throw the pieces into the Mississippi River. They set the warehouse on fire. John Brown walks across the street through the smoke. He steps over dying men without seeing them. He finds Lovejoy's body still warm, eyes open to the burning roof. He kneels in the blood and broken type and does something no one expects. He does not cry. He does not pray. He stands up in the middle of the burning warehouse, raises both fists to heaven, and speaks one sentence that will echo through the next 22 years like a death knell. Here, before God, in the presence of these witnesses, from this time I consecrate my life to the destruction of slavery. The mob is still cheering outside. They do not hear him. But the fire hears, the blood hears, history hears. John Brown walks out of the burning warehouse with soot on his face and murder in his eyes. The next morning, newspapers across the North call Lovejoy a martyr. Across the South, they call him a troublemaker who got what he deserved. John Brown buys no land in Illinois. He goes home to Ohio, kisses Mary Ann, looks at his sleeping children, and begins to sharpen a different kind of tool. He never speaks of that night again, not to his wife, not to his sons, not even to God. But every man who ever rode with him later swore that when John Brown got truly angry, truly quiet, the kind of quiet that comes before thunder, you could smell smoke on him, as if part of him never left that burning warehouse, as if part of him was still kneeling in Lovejoy's blood, making a promise the devil himself could not unmake. The night the printing press died, the night John Brown stopped asking nicely. From that night forward, there were two kinds of abolitionists, those who wrote letters and one man who wrote in fire. Lovejoy's blood soaked into the floorboards that night. John Brown carried it out on his boots all the way to Harpers Ferry, and every step he took afterward echoed with the sound of a press being smashed and a preacher dying for the crime of telling the truth. The Black Rage of 1837 was not loud. It was quiet. It was patient. It was absolute. And it had just found its perfect vessel.
Springfield, Ohio, 1840s. A quiet town that looked like any other until the sun went down. Then the cellars opened. John Brown's house sat on the edge of town. Ordinary clapboard, vegetable garden, chickens in the yard. But beneath the barn floor was a trapdoor no neighbor ever noticed. Every week, sometimes twice a week, a wagon rolled in after midnight carrying furniture from Cincinnati. The driver never stayed for coffee. John and his sons carried the furniture into the barn, lifted the trapdoor, and lowered human beings into a room no bigger than a grave. 20, 30, sometimes 40 souls at a time. Mothers clutching babies who had learned not to cry. Old men with whip scars older than the country itself. Young women with eyes that had seen things no child should see. Marianne met them with cornbread still hot from the oven, bowls of beans, and a smile that said without words, "You are safe now. You are home." While the children slept upstairs, John sat with the fugitives by candlelight and read from the book of Exodus, voice low but fierce. "Thus saith the Lord God of Israel, let my people go." Then he taught them the signals. 2 taps on the trapdoor meant danger. 3 taps meant all clear. A lantern hung in the north window meant the next station was ready. He gave them new names, sewed them into coats, taught them to read the stars in case they had to run again. One night in 1847, a 12-year-old girl arrived alone, barefoot, half dead from walking. Her back was a map of whip scars. She had escaped from Kentucky after her mother was sold south. John carried her inside himself. Marianne bathed her wounds with salt water while the girl shook so hard the table rattled. John knelt beside her and asked her name. She whispered, "They took it from me." He placed his hand on her head and said, "From tonight forward, your name is Ruth, after my mother who died bringing freedom into the world, and no man will ever take your name again." The girl looked up at him with eyes suddenly older than time and said, "Mr. Brown, are you the angel that breaks chains?" John Brown, the man who would one day terrorize a nation, felt tears fall into his beard. "No, child," he answered. "I'm just the hammer. You are the chain that's about to break." He kept her for 3 weeks until she could walk again. Then he put her on the last wagon north to Canada himself, kissed her forehead, and watched her disappear into the night. That same year, slave catchers came to Springfield with federal papers and guns. They kicked in doors looking for runaways. When they reached the Brown farm, John met them on the porch with a rifle across his knees and 20 armed neighbors behind him. The lead catcher read the warrant aloud. John listened without blinking, then spoke one sentence. "You'll have to kill me first, and then you'll have to kill all of us, and then you'll still have to dig up my barn with your bare hands. Choose wisely." The catchers chose to leave. Word spread up and down the Ohio River, do not go to Springfield looking for slaves. There is a man there who does not bluff. By 1849, John Brown had guided over 300 souls to freedom. He never kept count, he only kept promises. And in the quiet hours before dawn, when the last fugitive was gone and the trapdoor closed again, he would stand in the empty barn, look up at the stars, and whisper the same prayer every time. Lord, if I am doing wrong, strike me down now. But if I am doing right, give me strength to do more. The stars never answered, but the trapdoor kept opening. Ohio's abolitionist forge was not made of iron. It was made of a barn floor, a woman's cornbread, and a man who had decided long ago that some things are worth dying for. And every soul that passed through that cellar carried a piece of John Brown's fire north with them. They carried it all the way to Canada. Some carried it all the way to Harpers Ferry, because the Underground Railroad was never just a road. It was a forge, and John Brown was the hammer that never stopped swinging.
Her name was Mary Ann Day, and she was 17 when she married the storm. A tiny log church in New Richmond, Pennsylvania. John Brown, 33, towering, red-haired, eyes already burning with something most men never feel, stands at the altar in his only good black coat. Across from him stands Mary Ann, small, dark-haired, steady as winter earth. The preacher asks if she will take this man for better or worse, richer or poorer. She answers, "I will," in a voice so calm it sounds like fate speaking. She has no idea what she is promising. They move into a one-room cabin with a dirt floor and a leaking roof. Their wedding gift from Owen Brown is a single iron pot and a verse from Proverbs. She looketh well to the ways of her household, and eateth not the bread of idleness. Mary Ann hangs the verse above the door and begins a life that will make that verse look like a cruel joke. Within 13 years, she will bear 13 children. 7 will die before the age of 10. She will bury 4 of them with her own hands while John is away preaching abolition in towns that spit on him. She will cook over open fires and blizzards. She will spin wool until her fingers bleed so her children have clothes. She will nurse fugitive slaves in the loft while slave catchers drink coffee in her kitchen, and she will never once complain. People will later say John Brown's madness came from grief. They will be half right. The other half came from watching Mary Ann carry grief the way other women carry water, without spilling a drop. When John comes home from Kansas with blood on his shirt and ghosts in his eyes, she does not ask where it came from. She simply heats water, washes the shirt, and says, "Whatever you have done, John, I am with you. Just come home alive." When he tells her he is going to Harpers Ferry with 21 men and a wagon full of pikes, she is 8 months pregnant with their 13th child. She places his hand on her belly so he can feel the baby kick, then looks him dead in the eye and says, "If this is what God has called you to, then go. But remember, there are children here who still need a father. Do not make me bury you before I bury this one." He kisses her forehead and leaves at dawn. She stands in the doorway until he disappears into the trees, then goes inside, closes the door, and finally allows herself to cry. Once, silently, so the children will not hear. 6 weeks later, the telegram comes. John Brown captured, will hang December 2. Mary Ann reads it without flinching. She gathers the children, reads them the Beatitudes, then begins sewing a black dress she will wear to a funeral she refuses to believe is coming. On the day of the hanging, she is in labor. The same day John's neck snaps in Charlestown, Virginia, she gives birth to a daughter in North Elba, New York. She names the baby Ellen, after no one in particular, because some names are meant to carry pain. When they bring John's body home in a plain pine box, Mary Ann is waiting on the porch, baby in her arms, 3 weeks old, eyes already fierce like her father's. She does not scream. She does not faint. She walks down the steps, places one hand on the coffin lid, and says the only words she will ever say about that day. He is not dead. He is only just begun. Then she turns, goes inside, and raises 13 children on 20 acres of rocky Adirondack dirt, while the nation tears itself apart over the man she loved. Years later, when reporters come looking for the secret of John Brown's fire, they expect to find it in his Bible or his battles. They never think to look in the quiet woman who cooked for fugitives, buried babies, and never once told her husband he was wrong to follow the storm. Mary Ann Day Brown never gave a speech. She never wrote a manifesto. She never swung a sword. But every time John Brown stood up when the world told him to sit down, every time he chose death over compromise, every time he looked slavery in the eye and said, "Not while I breathe," Mary Ann was the steel in his spine. She forged the soldier with her silence, her steadiness, her refusal to break when everything else did. And when the history books write about the man who lit the fuse of the Civil War, they forget the woman who handed him the match and never once asked him to blow out the flame. Mary Ann Day Brown, 17 when she married the storm, 50 when she buried it, and every day in between, she kept it alive.
3. Apprentice to Revolution. He was 16 when the tannery became his university. Hudson, Ohio, 1816. A long, low building that stank of blood, brains, and lime. Skins hung like corpses from the rafters. The floor was always wet with something that used to be alive. John Brown rolled up his sleeves and stepped into the stink like a man stepping into holy ground. His father had sent him here to learn a trade, to become respectable, to earn money for the family. John learned something far more dangerous. He learned what a human back looks like after the whip has finished teaching it lessons. The tanner who employed him, a man named Amos, kept 2 enslaved boys in the yard. One was 16, one was 12. The same age as John had been when he first saw chains. They rose before dawn to stir the lime vats. They slept on the floor beside the drying racks. They ate whatever scraps the dogs left. And every Friday night, if the hides were not cured perfectly,
Amos took a leather strap to their backs while John was forced to watch. The first time it happened, John vomited behind the shed. The second time, he clenched his fists so hard his nails drew blood from his palms. The third time, he walked straight up to Amos in front of the other apprentices and said, "If you ever touch them again, I will take that strap and use it on you." The yard went dead silent. Amos laughed, called him a nigger-loving Yankee whelp, and beat the boys twice as hard to prove who owned the world. That night, John stole a blanket from the house, carried it to the shed where the boys slept, and wrapped it around the one whose back was still bleeding. The older boy, named Jim, looked at him with eyes that had forgotten how to hope. "Why you do this, Mr. John? You get us both killed." John knelt in the straw. "Because I made a promise when I was 12, and I keep my promises." From that night on, the tannery became his classroom. He learned how to hide runaways in the soaking vats when slave catchers came through town. He learned how to read the Bible out loud in a whisper that still sounded like thunder. He learned that most white men would rather die than admit a black man is their equal. He learned that respectability is the slow poison they feed good men to keep them quiet. At 25, he married Dianthe Lusk, sweet, quiet, God-fearing. They set up house in a tiny cabin behind the tannery. Their first child came the same year John opened his own tanning business in Pennsylvania. He posted a sign above the door that no customer ever forgot. "No slave labor used here, ever." Customers laughed. Some walked away. John didn't care. He took in fugitive slaves instead of hired help, paid them wages, sat them at his table, taught them to read from the same Bible his father had read to him the night he was born. When the neighbors threatened to burn his tannery down, John loaded his rifle, stood on the porch, and quoted Exodus until they left. When the church elders told him he was unchristian for treating black people as equals, he walked out mid-sermon and never went back. At 25, he buried his first wife and 4 of their children. Grief carved him like a blade carves wood. But every coffin he built with his own hands reminded him, death is patient, injustice is not. He began writing letters to abolitionist newspapers under fake names. He began preaching on street corners with a voice that made horses stop and listen. He began carrying a small notebook where he wrote down every act of cruelty he witnessed, every name of every enslaved person he met, every promise he made to free them. One night in 1825, alone in the tannery after everyone had gone to bed, he opened a fresh page and wrote in ink so dark it looked like blood. "I, John Brown, do solemnly consecrate my life to the destruction of slavery. If I must die in the attempt, so be it, but slavery will die with me." He signed it, dated it, pressed the Bible on top until the ink dried. Then he went back to work, skinning hides, stirring vats, teaching fugitive children their letters by firelight. The tannery saw a tanner. God saw a soldier in training. The tannery was never about leather. It was about sharpening a blade no one could see yet. 15 years later, when that blade finally flashed at Pottawatomie, when it finally struck at Harpers Ferry, people would call him sudden. They would call him insane. They never understood he had been sharpening it, day after day, in the stink of blood and lime since he was 16 years old. The Apprentice had become the revolution, and the revolution had only one teacher, a boy who once watched 2 enslaved children bleed for someone else's profit, and decided the world would bleed before he let it happen again.
He was 12 years old when the chains first spoke to him. Summer of 1812, a dusty road outside Meadville, Pennsylvania. John Brown, barefoot, red-haired, freckles still on his cheeks, walking 3 miles behind a herd of cattle his father had told him to drive to market. He is alone, humming a hymn, throwing stones at fence posts, still believing the world is mostly good. Then he sees the wagon, a flatbed pulled by 2 mules. On it sits a boy about his own age, dark skin, ragged shirt, wrists and ankles bound with iron that has rubbed them raw and bleeding. A white man in a sweat-stained hat walks beside the wagon, holding a coiled whip. John stops humming. The enslaved boy looks up. Their eyes meet across 20 feet of hot road. The boy on the wagon does not cry. He just stares, empty, like someone who has already used up every tear he will ever own. John takes 1 step forward. The slave driver notices. He cracks the whip in the air, not touching the child, just reminding him who owns the sky. "Keep moving, boy." The man growls at John. "Ain't your business." John's feet stay planted. Something inside him, something older than 12 years, something that was born the night his mother almost died, bringing him into the world, rises up like a storm. He wants to scream. He wants to run. He wants to tear the chains off with his bare hands. Instead, he stands frozen while the wagon rolls past, raising dust that tastes like shame. That night, he reaches the inn where the cattle are kept, the same inn where the slave driver has chained his property to a ring in the barn wall. John lies awake on the hayloft above him. He can hear the iron clinking every time the boy shifts in his sleep. Clink, 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 like a clock counting down to hell. At dawn, the slave driver feeds his human cargo a crust of bread and a swallow of water. He offers John the same thing. John refuses. He has decided food tastes different when one boy eats free and another eats in chains. When they part ways, the enslaved boy looks up one last time. He does not speak, but his eyes say everything. Remember me. John never forgets. He walks the 50 miles home in silence. When he finally reaches the cabin, his father Owen is repairing harness in the yard. John drops the cattle prod, falls to his knees in the dirt, and for the first time in his life cries the way only children who have just seen evil can cry. Owen kneels beside him. "What happened, son?" John can barely speak. "I saw a boy, my age, in chains. They fed him like a dog. They beat him if he looked up. Father, how can God allow this?"
Owen's face hardens the way only a man who has carried this same rage for decades can harden. He pulls his son close and whispers the words that will brand themselves into John Brown's soul forever. God doesn't allow it, John. Men do. And one day, if good men do nothing, God will ask us why we stood by and watched. That night, John steals his father's Bible, climbs to the loft, and by candlelight finds the verse that will become his life sentence. Remember them that are in bonds, as bound with them. He underlines it in charcoal until the page tears. Then he takes a knife and carves something into the wooden beam above his bed, letters rough and deep. I will never own a slave, and I will never let another man own one. The next morning, he is different. The freckles are still there, the red hair still sticks up like fire, but the eyes are older than the mountains. He begins asking questions no white boy in 1812 Pennsylvania is supposed to ask. He begins noticing things no one wants him to notice. He begins hating, not with the small hate of children, but with the large, slow, patient hate of a man who has decided the world must burn before it can be made right. Years later, when people ask where the terrorist began, where the madman was born, they will look for complicated answers. They will never understand it was simple. It was a dusty road. It was a boy in chains who could not cry anymore. It was another boy who cried enough for both of them. And from that day forward, every time John Brown closed his eyes, he heard the clink of iron that never stopped. He was 12 years old when the chains first spoke to him. They said only one word: remember.
The year is 1800. The place is Torrington, Connecticut. A place so cold in May that the ground is still white with the last breath of winter. Inside a small log cabin on the edge of nowhere, a fire crackles like it is trying to fight the darkness itself. The wind howls outside, rattling the shutters, throwing snow against the windows like it wants to get in and stop what is about to happen. But nothing can stop this birth. Ruth Brown, 26 years old, beautiful the way only frontier women are beautiful, lies on a straw mattress soaked with sweat and blood. She has been in labor for 20 hours. Her husband, Owen, a tanner with hands like oak and a voice that can quote the entire book of Exodus without looking, kneels beside her holding her hand as if it is the only thing keeping the world together. Outside, the neighbors have given up hope. They whisper that no woman can survive this long. Inside, Owen does not whisper. He prays out loud, fierce and unafraid, the way only a man who has seen slavery with his own eyes can pray. Let this child live, Lord. Let this child be a hammer and a fire. Let this child break chains. At 3:17 in the morning, when the fire is almost dead and the candles have burned down to nothing, Ruth screams one final time, and the room fills with the sound of a baby's cry so loud, so angry, so alive, that even the wind outside seems to pause. They name him John Brown. The midwife wraps him in a quilt stitched from old Abolitionist banners. His first breath tastes of smoke and snow and scripture. Owen lifts the tiny boy toward the dying fire and speaks the words that will follow this child for the rest of his life. You were born in fire, son. Never forget what fire is for. Years later,
when the name John Brown will make half a nation cheer and half a nation tremble, people will argue about where the madness began. Some will say Pottawatomie. Some will say Harpers Ferry. They will all be wrong. It began here, in a freezing cabin in Connecticut, in the snow that refused to melt in May, in the arms of a mother who almost died bringing him into the world, and in the voice of a father who dared to pray for a destroyer. The neighbors leave when they see the baby is alive. They shake their heads and mutter about bad omens, because no child should scream that loud at birth. But inside the cabin, Owen Brown opens his Bible with hands that still shake from answered prayer and reads aloud the verse he has chosen for his son. Is not this the fast that I have chosen? To loose the bands of wickedness, to undo the heavy burdens, to let the oppressed go free, and to break every yoke. Little John Brown, barely an hour old, stops crying when he hears his father's voice. His tiny fist unclenches. His eyes, already fierce, stare at the fire as if he understands every word. Outside, the snow keeps falling. Inside, a fire is lit that will never go out. 60 years from this night, another fire will burn, this time in a Virginia engine house, and the man who started it will remember this cabin, this snow, this prayer. He will smile beneath his beard and whisper to the Marines who have come to kill him, "I was born for this." Because long before he ever picked up a sword, long before he ever wrote a manifesto in blood, John Brown was just a baby wrapped in abolitionist rags, listening to his father read Isaiah in a room that smelled of smoke and snow and the promise of thunder. That night, in a cabin no one remembers anymore, a radical was born. Not with a gun in his hand, but with a verse in his heart. And the snow kept falling, trying and failing to put out the fire that had just begun.